Hey, it's Conrad Thompson from SaveWithConrad.com. Heads up, homeowners, all of a sudden your house is worth more than ever these last few years. But what are we going to do with that newfound equity? No, I'm not suggesting you sell your house and go buy something else. But didn't we all make this decision when we bought a house where we said, hey, someday we'd like to, and one day it would be nice if, maybe it's the dream kitchen, maybe it's an in-ground pool, maybe it's a man cave. But you've got this newfound equity, and I think we should use some of that equity to turn your house into your dream home with no money out of pocket. But even better than that, we're routinely helping folks do this, and they wind up with a cheaper monthly payment. So if you got the dream house you always wanted, with no money out of pocket, and your payments went down, how easy is that? Find out how easy it is to turn your house into your dream home with no money out of pocket right now at SaveWithConrad.com. We can't wait to hear about your projects. Tell us what your dream is. We're going to help you make it happen at SaveWithConrad.com.
NMLS number 65084, Equal Housing Lender. Woo!
How's it going, everyone? It's time for another edition of Strictly Business with Eric Bischoff, presented to you by the Ad-Free Shows and Podcast Heat Networks. I am Jon Alba, and it's going to be a couple minutes of gloating, just a little bit, but not much to gloat about because my man, Eric Bischoff, we should just start calling him Nostradamus. He is here on this edition of Strictly Business, and man, I'll give you some credit. You're pretty good at this thing. You're pretty good at this thing.
Yeah, I wish there was money in it. But
How's
it's
it going,
fun.
Eric Bischoff? How you
It's
doing,
fun.
man?
I had one of the most fun days, wrestling-wise, wrestling adjacent-wise, I should say, in a long time. You know, just watching just the sheer crazy level of crazy that was taking place yesterday on social media. Not the least of which was Tony Khan himself. It was just a fun time to just sit back and watch crazy people talk crazy shit.
It certainly was quite the adventure with all the lead up to NXT and AEW going head to head here. And that is going to be the focus of our episode as we look at the one night only Tuesday Night War that went down and the fallout from it. And we're going to try to break these shows down and look at the show structure, because that's something that I know you really love to get into the weeds of, and production. And I think we're going to have a good time talking about that. Before we get into any of that, Eric, we are live right now on adfreeshows.com. We got Coach Rosie saying this could get testy. We got Dylan here saying Eric really is mystical and all-knowing. We got Amy. Amy,
I hope so, because I got 2 lottery tickets for that 1.75 billion sitting in my wallet. So,
yeah, man. I mean, you gotta lay down some knowledge on that front. But those are our friends over at adfreeshows.com. If you're watching live, you're a top guy, you're a top gal, leave us a comment, leave us a question throughout the course of this. We'll pop them up throughout the podcast. And you know, Eric, they are not the only ones who are going to be having a lot of fun here on adfreeshows.com, because we've added a new member to our family, and that is someone you know very, very well. The Total Package, Lex Luger. He's joined the stable over on adfreeshows.com. The debut episode of Lex Express with Lex Luger just dropped as Lex opens up about his jump from WWF to WCW, his relationship with Sting and Ric Flair, and of course the infamous Bruiser Brody cage match.
I just had some minor surgery. I got stitches, 4 or 5 stitches on my body. I used to wear a tank top I tore off when I went to the ring. So I'm going to leave the tank top on to cover those, because I'm supposed to keep them covered for a few days. He nodded, like acknowledged that. But I told him, what's the first thing he did when we got in the ring? Tore my shirt off.
Yes.
Like, wow, I wonder if he didn't understand, or I didn't know the wrestling person. I green lighted him. Okay, this young kid's telling me not to tear his shirt off. I'm gonna tear his shirt off as soon as I get in there. So
some good old fashioned wrestling ribbon there, Eric Bischoff. He's a great storyteller, isn't he?
Lex is a wonderful human being. To me, he's very inspirational. he's gone through so much, and he has come out one of the most solid human beings I know. So very, very happy and grateful that he's a part of the Ad Free Shows team.
As am I. And if you want to catch that entire debut episode of Lex Express right now, plus thousands of hours of other bonus series like the Tuesday with the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan, the Hacksaw Hour with Jim Duggan, Ask Conrad, the book with David Crockett, and much more, you can head on over now to get that exclusive access at adfreeshows.com.
By the way, speaking of books, I'm going to throw this out here right now. There is a new book coming your way called The Six Pack by a friend of mine. His name is Brad Belugian. If you look for the Wax Pack, or I think it's his handle on Twitter, Twix, is the Wax Pack. Look for him, follow him, and as soon as that book becomes available, order it. I'm in the process of reading an advanced copy right now, and it is an amazing, amazing book that every wrestling fan on the planet is going to enjoy. It is unbelievable.
I thought you were going to help me get a six-pack here, but I'm good with that too. I always take a good
six-pack. Watch for it.
Good stuff. Love a good promotion there. And you should always check out all of Eric Bischoff's reading recommendations. He's a smart guy when it comes to that kind of stuff. And listen, man, we'll get right off the bat here. We made a wager last week about these AEW viewership numbers here. And to your credit, Eric, you threw out the number 600,000, and I had a pretty volatile reaction to that. And then I came down to earth a little bit when I realized, well, it's
let's be clear. I predicted 600,000 for AEW. That's what you had. That's what you had the volatile reaction.
Yes. So just because it was a shocking number to me at first, I thought on it a little bit, and I still figured they'd go higher than that. I came down with my number a little bit, but I still figured they'd get higher than that. And
what was your prediction, by the way? What was your prediction, John?
Initially, my prediction, I think, was around 800,000. I came down on social with it, or to be around 700,000. But still, I thought they would clear 600 easily, and it came in at 609,000. So the wager we put was, if it was over 600, you'd buy me dinner. And I'd like to say this off the bat: I prefer my olive Wagyu cooked medium rare, but because you were so close with this, and you went out on a limb and bucked a trend of what a lot of people were thinking, and you nailed it. You really did. All the drinks are on me when we make
there
this
you
happen,
go.
okay?
That'll be fun. And you know what? I'm really looking forward to buying you that steak.
Oh, yeah.
This was a fun banter back and forth. And like I said, yesterday was a blast. Watched both shows. I watched NXT last night and watched a good portion. I didn't get a chance to complete Dynamite today, in between other things I was doing. But that head-to-head vibe was just fun. I talked about all the crazy yesterday, and I'm not kidding. I really enjoyed it. It was entertaining as hell, watching people chime in and listening to their opinions. And again, the Tony Khan stuff was just off the wall, crazy. And then, of course, watching, knowing that this head-to-head thing was going on and so many people were emotionally invested in it. It was good energy, man. It was fun energy.
It was Tony Khan's birthday on Tuesday. Is his 41st birthday. Happy birthday, Tony.
41 going on 12.
Oh, come on now. Come on. Just wish him a happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
There you go. So, okay. He was vocal on Twitter. Or Twix. He absolutely was. A lot of it was promotion. A lot of it was shots. I mean, he went out on a limb, and breaking down the actual numbers here, Eric, because we did get the viewership numbers. We're still awaiting the quarter hours, and that might come down as we tape. But NXT, in overall viewership, 921,000. AEW Dynamite, 609,000. In the demo, NXT goes 0.30, Dynamite 0.26. So not terribly off there, but a big disparity in the overall viewership for sure. Two very different approaches to these shows. Before we get into the weeds of it, your general reaction to what you saw out of both shows on Tuesday night.
Both of them were inspired, both of them. And I think particularly the NXT show, the energy was at an 8 or a 9 on a scale of 1 to 10, seemingly throughout the entire episode. And that goes to formatting, building, and great talent. Visually, I liked Dynamite better. Dynamite had the advantage in that even though it was in a small venue, I think it was a 4,000 seat venue, which by the way, they didn't sell out, at least according to the posts that I saw from WrestleTix. A 4,000 seat arena, but it still had you had 4,000 people there. You got a lot more energy. You've got more, and I've said it a million times. I used to say it in TNA. I don't care who you put in a soundstage. I don't care what you do in a soundstage. It will never have the energy or authenticity of a live event when compared to a live event in a real venue. And that was the big advantage production-wise that I feel Dynamite had. And despite that, NXT was able to build and hold a greater audience. So hats off to them. I did like the energy. We're not talking about the matches, not talking about the finishes, but they're cheap bullshit. I'm talking about the production, the way the show was presented. I think Dynamite had a much bigger advantage.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the interesting trend that I find when I look at those numbers. Again, 921,000 for NXT, 609,000 for Dynamite. But the demos were relatively close. The 1849, 0.30 compared to 0.26. To me, that says that a lot of the audience that NXT pulled were the older audience. And they significantly outdrew AEW in the older audience. I know that's something that we see happen with NXT traditionally, where they do have a generally older audience, but they seemingly came out in droves here with the promotions of Paul Heyman, John Cena, Cody Rhodes, etc. Does anything about that strike you as fascinating as it does me?
No,
No.
Because I have a different perspective, I think.
Okay.
Mine being that there is so much duplication in the audience between the two. I don't know what the number is, and I don't have access to the data, but my gut tells me about 75 or 80% of the Dynamite audience is also a WWE audience. And I think the WWE, because of the star power, quite frankly, regardless of their age, I think too much time is spent discussing talent's age, because the younger demo is just as excited about a Paul Heyman or a John Cena right now, because it's only temporary, or an Undertaker or Becky Lynch, or, you name it. Especially, oh my gosh, the guy. I'm just blanking here.
LA Knight.
LA Knight. God, how did I forget? I'm a huge fan. I just blanked on it. I don't care what their birth certificate says. They're going to draw a younger demo because they're fucking exciting and they're fun to watch and they're great entertainers. But more than any of that, I believe that there's just so much duplication between the two audiences. And when given an opportunity, the majority of that audience is going to watch a WWE product, head to head or otherwise. I think there's a very small portion of the Dynamite audience, the AEW audience, that do not watch WWE. And I think, we've been seeing it. And one of the reasons that I revised my number a little bit last night. I predicted that NXT would win. They would end up with 975,000 viewers, and I think I came in at 600 or whatever it was, maybe a little more. Can't remember my own post, but 600 for AEW. And a lot of the reason why I was so confident in predicting that is because I'm convinced of the duplication factor and the fact that WWE, whether it's in NXT or on Raw or on SmackDown, they understand television. And that's the big distinction between WWE and AEW. AEW, for however much of a huge wrestling fan Tony Khan's been all of his life, doesn't mean he understands television. And that's the difference. One group knows how to produce television. The other one gets to put together fantasy wrestling matches.
I find it really interesting you say that in regards to this particular episode of Dynamite, because I think generally that's been a common criticism from you, a constructive criticism from you about AEW in terms of physically producing the show and stacking it and etc. I felt watching this, I tried to watch both shows as objectively clear-cut as I could. I thought this particular edition of AEW, from a storytelling perspective and a show production format perspective, lined up with so much more of the things that you preach week to week here on this podcast about show structure and A story and B story. I thought this particular episode of Dynamite did much more of that than the NXT episode did. Not to say I enjoyed both. I thought both were very fun and very different. But I find that interesting that you say that. Is there any particular reason what you would push back on in terms of flow and structure of this particular week's episode of Dynamite?
It's easy when you're just looking at one. When you say, they did a better job storytelling. I'm sorry, the storytelling should have taken place weeks ago and months ago. They put together the hottest matches they could and showcased some of their top talent as best they could.
Well, but I think this came off this, not to cut you off, but these stories, the beats that we saw in Dynamite were related very much directly to the story beats that were laid down in the weeks prior.
But the stories they're weak. What people who are the most ardent supporters of AEW, including those in the company, what they refer to as a story is not a story. It's an excuse for a match. The stories don't have the arc, the drama, the vulnerability at the right point in time, the self-doubt at the right point in time. They don't have the ingredients that actually make a story. They're what's referred to as a story to justify a match. And what beats there are in an arc are they're not compelling. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. That's a story. Nobody's going to give a shit about it unless you make it a great love story. And I'm almost tired of pointing it out because people only want to hear what they want to hear. And formatting the show, look, they started off hot with Brian. They started off with a hot star. When was the last time we saw Bryan Danielson in action?
See, but I'm going to go even further back than that, Eric, because I think you're jumping across.
Whoa. Let me finish my thought, please, first.
Please, go ahead.
We saw Bryan Danielson.
That wasn't how the show started.
What did I miss?
You missed a critical element of the story of the show, which was Christian Cage with his cold open where he's in the production truck. And this was so different than anything AEW's done, maybe ever. Christian Cage, who's the A story character right now, is in the production truck and he's running down what we're going to see on Dynamite. He says that he, as the face of TNT, has procured 30 minutes commercial free to start. And later on tonight, you're going to see his best friend Luchasaurus beat Adam Copeland and prove why Christian's the father of AEW, the daddy. Is
that
of
on
AEW.
a show or a pre-show?
No, that was literally how the show opened up.
My tape must have started a few seconds.
Oh, your DVR was off, huh?
No, my set, it might have been. But by the way, I watched it on Sling. I recorded it on Sling, so I'll have to go back and look at it again.
I hope that doesn't count as same day viewership, Eric. We wouldn't want that to cause any problems there with viewership counting. No, but that's what I loved, because I was like, man, this is such a great way to set the pace for what the A story is going to be for this show. And you have this central character to it, and it's going to be paid off later. We'll get into that, all that. So, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but that was
you should have interrupted,
Yeah.
because that's a critical point. And I'm glad you pointed it out. And my apologies for missing that. I'm going to have to go back and figure out how or why I missed it. But when I jumped in, it was for Bryan Danielson's match, and I was excited to see that, because anybody that's watched Nitro knows, whenever possible, more often than not, I like to start out hot and end hot. And what you just described was a great way of setting up that particular match, an important match, an A story. Clearly it wasn't very effective, but it was a good start. And I think starting out with someone like Bryan Danielson, who is across the board with WWE fans as well as now AEW fans, is a very popular performer. But again, as someone who doesn't watch Dynamite regularly, clearly,
nor NXT, for the record, want to point that
nor
out
NXT, for the record, this was a special occasion for me, much to the chagrin of my wife. By the way, before I go any further, I want to shout out Dylan Leahy, Amy Vaughn, thank you. Welcome to the Testicle Festival. Michael Quaid, Adam O'Neill, Brian Hermon. Brian, how are you, man? Great to see all of you here. If there's more, I'll get to you. But I think they did a better job of formatting the show, but it's still the stories, but what you and a lot of the AEW fans call stories are just not great stories. They're not compelling stories. They're just not. And it's one of the reasons why.
I'm not trying to carry anyone's water here. It's just, I think that right now you had, unfortunately, the whole MJF Adam Cole story is taking a bunch of detours because of the injury suffered by Adam Cole, and they're trying to figure that one out on the fly. That happens, right? That's part of wrestling.
Life.
People get hurt. It's
That's life.
Right? Exactly. I think that this Christian Cage Adam Copeland story is very much one of the more compelling stories that they're telling. They laid the groundwork fantastically last week, and then throughout the course of this episode, it was revisited 3 different times. Like and that's not a story of, oh, we're just building to a match. That's a story about brotherhood, about family, and about trying to end their last chapters.
Betrayal. Yes, I get it. Potentially,
betrayal.
Yes.
Right.
I would argue that I would argue that it's not necessarily compelling enough. Last week's ratings didn't reflect it. This week's ratings certainly didn't reflect it. So let's be careful about how compelling we want to rate a story when the results of said story are not reflected in audience. I mean, I like it. I'm not criticizing it. I like the idea of it. The premise thus far is a good, solid premise from which one could craft a great story. And we'll find out if they do.
That's my point, is not whether it's a good story or a bad story. My point is rather, it's not a story that's based on who's better or we're building to this match.
Right.
There's actual elemental stakes here of things that go beyond the wrestling ring. And
We'll see.
Groundwork wise, it has been laid as such. I think the Hangman Page and Swerve story is about Swerve trying to prove that he's a man of the culture who has kind of been held back by the system, and he's trying to climb the ranks to prove that an African-American man can achieve great things, and he has felt that he's been a victim of the system and everything. And then simultaneously, Hangman Page is saying that his intentions are misguided rather. I think that's different, and that's interesting. But again, subjectivity. I want to get into breaking down this actual show here. Because I have the head-to-heads courtesy of our friends over at WrestleNomics and Brandon Thurston, who does such a great job, where we can actually see the segments head-to-head. Eric, I saw a great comment, or at least I thought it was a very interesting comment from SP3, who's a pro wrestling commentator out there, and he said that NXT felt like an all-star game, Whereas Dynamite this week felt a little more like a playoff game where they're trying to further something, whereas NXT was, we're going to throw all these big stars at you and try to build as compelling of a TV show out there. When you look at this lineup of stars here across that NXT board, did you get a feeling at all that this was, let's throw everything that we can here? And
No,
try
and
to make
look,
something
and
happen?
again, all of the gnashing of teeth that's transpiring as we record this from AEW fans, it's all going to go, yeah, but they had to load it up. Let's be honest about this stuff. Cody Rhodes, John Cena, Undertaker, Paul Heyman, did they wrestle? They didn't. And on the other side, you've got Bryan Danielson, former WWE, Chris Jericho,
Sure.
former WWE, big stars.
Sure.
Adam Copeland, fresh
Mhm.
off of WWE, major star.
His
been
first
there
match.
forever.
His first
Been
match.
there forever. So you've got a lot of the WWE former talent in the ring actually performing, whereas on the next episode, yes, they showed up and they made an appearance, but that's not the same thing as wrestling. So they brought them in as window dressing. They brought them in as supporting cast members, but they didn't make them stars. They were already stars that showed up to the party versus the stars, the former WWE stars that are now in Dynamite, are actually in the ring, engaged in what they refer to as a story. So I think those who make too much out of the fact that they loaded up, and yes, they did. They loaded it up because for probably two reasons. One is, as they have been doing in the weeks prior to this episode, they're positioning for a new home. They're entering into rights negotiations.
Yeah.
And they're going to do whatever they can do to get those numbers as high as they can as they're going into those negotiations. That is not unique. That's just business, and it's been going on for a while. Do I think that they went the extra mile because of the head-to-head thing? Sure, anybody would have. It's fun. Why not? So I think people that are making the case for, yeah, but Next wouldn't have been able to do it if they hadn't brought in all their heavyweight stars. I don't know that I agree with that. Do I think that they would have trounced, embarrassed, and humiliated AEW to the extent that they did with the numbers without stacking it? No, I don't. Do I think they still would have come out on top without all that? Yes, I do.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen in recent weeks NXT has been doing good numbers, and they haven't needed all these stars to come over, but they've been using one or two every show, and it has been helping them. And I mean, here's the way I look at it. If you've got these people at your disposal and you've got this great roster, why the hell not use them, right? Like, if you've got one of the greatest rosters ever assembled, I don't care what TV show it is, use them. Like, they're at your disposal. That's a good way to draw eyes to your television program. I mean, I think it's kind of cool that Cody Rhodes showed up on NXT. He's the most popular guy on your TV show right now, and let's get him on another brand. The question becomes, do all these cameos, because that's essentially what they were cameos, does it stifle story? Did any of these cameos, in your opinion, further story on this episode of NXT?
Not qualified to say yes or no, simply because I don't know what the stories have been in NXT, so that would be stupid for me to do that.
Okay.
Here's what I do believe, though. I believe that every one of the talents that we saw in that ring benefited from the rub. You know, that's a term that people have been hearing now for decades, right?
Mhm.
You're in the ring with the Undertaker. You've got a segment backstage with Paul Heyman. You're in a bit of an angle with John Cena with physicality. Every one of those stars benefited those young talents. They're not stars yet. This is still the C show. This is still the developmental roster, folks. And every one of them benefited from their interactions with that top talent that came in from WWE as cameo appearances. Every one of them, some more than others. Ron Breaker really did. If he's in NXT a month from now, I'm going to be shocked.
Anyone other than Braun Breaker stand out to you on the show?
I didn't take notes watching these shows. I just watched them. Because if I start taking notes, I'm missing shit. Like, obviously I missed Cages Open. Names are going to escape me, but I love the first women's match in NXT. Like, that was tight. Those women were awesome.
It was Asuka and Roxanne Perez, right?
You tell me.
Asuka's a main roster talent. She came down there for that. Roxanne Perez, she's stellar, man. She's going to be a star of the future for WWE.
It was just a really exciting.
She's a Booker T trainee.
Well, kudos to Booker T.
There you go.
And the team at the Performance Center, because she's tight. I don't know how good she is, with a mic in her hand, but phew, for a developmental talent to be able to perform at that level under that pressure, she's going places.
Those ladies were cooking, Eric Bischoff, and we want to have you cooking this fall too, by the way, with our friends over at HelloFresh, proud sponsor of this week's edition of Strictly Business. I know this year, the fall season, it came upon us very, very quickly. Eric, believe it or not, in like a month and a half, Thanksgiving's here. And you want to be stocked up and ready for the fall season, especially when those holidays start to roll around. Well, with HelloFresh, you get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. You can skip trips to the grocery store. Count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. And that's why it is America's #1 meal kit. A crazy schedule can make it easy to fall back into your dinner time recipe rut. Well, you can keep mealtime exciting with more than 40 recipes to choose from every single week, so that there's always something delicious to discover with HelloFresh. And even though the fall can feel a little jam-packed, HelloFresh makes whipping up a home-cooked dinner actually doable with quick and easy options, including their 15-minute meals. That's less time than it takes to get delivery. And with everything pre-portioned and delivered right to your door every week, it really is a no-brainer. I know, Eric, that eating right and efficiently is something that's very important to you. Why is HelloFresh part of your routine?
Because the quality of the food is phenomenal. And I'll be honest, I was somewhat cynical when I heard that HelloFresh was going to become a sponsor. Always happy to welcome a new sponsor, but I love sponsors and partners on this show. We're on 83 weeks that I truly, truly believe in. And I don't want to say cynical, but I've had these different kinds of subscriptions before.
Sure.
And won't eat them. Simply just won't eat them. When you look at the ingredients and just the overall quality of the food, sure, the convenience is great, but I'm far more interested in nutrition and in freshness and flavor than I am in convenience. So when we first got the product delivered to us, before we started promoting it, I was asked, I had to fill out a little questionnaire, and I was asked by the folks at HelloFresh what kind of food packages I was interested in. I noticed they had one for people who are on a keto diet. Now, I am not 100% strict every day with a keto diet approach. I'm probably about 80% of the time. I feel better eating that way. I'm not necessarily too worried about my weight or anything right now, but I just love to feel good. And I know that when I'm on my keto diet plan, I feel better. I have more energy. I have more focus. So when I saw that, wow, I even have that as an option. That's interesting to me. So they piqued my interest with the very fact that I could specialize the types of foods that I want to deliver to the home. When we finally got our first package, in fact, Lori and I had been on a trip somewhere. We've been gone for a while, and we were pulling into the driveway. It was late in the afternoon, early evening, and we were both exhausted. And I saw the box sitting in front of our door. It had just been delivered. And I thought, well, this is as good a time as any to try it, because neither one of us felt like making dinner. And I opened it up, took a look at it. First thing I did is read the ingredients. I went, wow, this is impressive. And then we prepared our meals, and the flavor was phenomenal. It is high quality, nutritious food. You can tailor it to your specific diet or tastes. And I'm blown away by it. It is a great product. It's a great service. I love it.
Yeah, I love that if you're a visual learner, HelloFresh spells it all out for you. They give these graphic cards that literally show you step by step how to make these meals. I mean, it's foolproof and they really are delicious. You can turn to HelloFresh Market for yummy add-ons and enjoy the season's limited fall flavors lineup. Feast on desserts like apple cider cake with caramel sauce, or you can please the crown with appetizers like the barbecue pulled pork nachos. And don't forget the mini pumpkin cheesecake. Perfect for a me time treat. Are you a pumpkin guy, Eric?
No.
No, that's fine. It's a very divisive topic here in the fall season. But if you are, you want to
That's
try
what we
that
need.
out.
Something more to be divisive about. Let's argue over pumpkin.
Well, it is unanimous that HelloFresh is the answer here. Go to HelloFresh.com/50WrestleBiz and use code 50WrestleBiz for 50% off plus free shipping. That's HelloFresh.com/50WRESTLEBIZ and use code 50WRESTLEBIZ for 50% off plus free shipping. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. Now, Eric, as that fantastic advertisement for our partners at HelloFresh was being delivered, we got the quarter hours for this AEW Dynamite versus NXT head-to-head, and I'm going to throw them up right now for us here. So I know it may be a little tough for you to read if you are watching on the Strictly Business YouTube, which is, of course, the 83 Weeks YouTube. But the highest viewership point for AEW was the beginning of the show, which was the Christian Cage promo and the Bryan Danielson and Swerve match. Of course, you're getting lead-ins from there. And that was also the highest point for NXT. But there is an interesting trend there if you're looking at the graphs. NXT did peak a couple other times. It came back up on the valley, whereas AEW pretty much stayed. I guess it kind of valleyed and didn't really pop back up. NXT came back up primarily for the LA Knight appearance. Who would have thought, given how popular he is right now? And then for the main event, which would also see The Undertaker appear. AEW did get a little bit of a boost for the Adam Copeland main event. But looking at those numbers there, Eric, and those trends, does anything jump out to you? I know you said you don't care too much about quarters, but curious your thoughts.
Well, again, if I'm reading this right, so NXT is obviously in the gray here.
NXT is in the gold.
Okay. I'm sorry. That's what I meant to say.
Yes.
All right. So NXT is in the gold. They opened up with 991.
Mm-hmm.
They ended up with 960.
Yes.
Had a 958 in the break.
Correct.
It's pretty consistent. Pretty damn consistent. You look at the opening for Dynamite, what do we see? What's the number, John?
731.
What'd they end up with?
606.
So how effective was that open with Christian? The idea of starting out your show hot, the idea of planting that seed and nurturing it throughout the episode is so that you end up with a higher rating at the end of the show than you opened up with. That's the goal.
I mean, it was like a 30-second opening. It wasn't like this long 10-minute promo or anything.
Okay, now all of a sudden it's not. So I missed 30
No,
seconds.
I'm just saying. I'm not.
No, now I missed 30 seconds. Okay. But that 30 but you you laugh, and I'm not making a joke here or not busting your balls. But if you're going to open up the show with something, the idea is not just to say check the box and say, oh, this is what's going to happen. It's to do it in a compelling way that will hopefully build throughout the hour so that your main event delivers big. Now, you could argue that in the case of NXT, they opened up with a 991 and they dropped to a 960. But the 960 is the biggest number they had after the open. Keep in mind, when a show starts, you have a certain amount of residual audience that's going to come with you as a result of what was on for a brief period of time. It is not unusual for a show to open up, especially a wrestling show, right? Mm-hmm. Because the wrestling audience is a very unique audience. and your lead-in is generally not going to matter at all. You can hope to hang on to as much of that lead-in as you can, but it is not unusual, especially if you've got a great lead-in, but it's not a lead-in for a wrestling audience. You're going to drop, and it's not unusual. But the fact that, we're talking about how compelling the open was and how unique it was and exciting it was to see them open up with Christian Cage talking about what's going to happen later on in the show. And evidently the audience didn't really give a fuck. They lost a lot. That's a big dip. So I'm a little surprised at that. Nothing
NXT
else.
opened with a Cody Rhodes promo, which so what I'm curious. So would you, and this is me genuinely asking, would you attribute that to caliber of star power then?
I would attribute that to star power and general interest. Going back, duplication of audience. Cody Rhodes opens up the show. Cody Rhodes, the Dynamite audience loves him. The WWE audience loves him. Guess what? They're going to open up the show with Cody Rhodes. What do you think is going to happen? Of course. But it doesn't matter. The point, in terms of the point I'm making is that open did not sufficiently engage the audience to the extent that it served the purpose of building interest for the main event. Now, how could they have done that? This is, and honestly, I think I have the same critique for WWE or for NXT as well. But I would have done NXT a little differently.
Okay.
I would have opened that first segment would have been much harder if I would have been on the team writing it.
So it wouldn't have been this announcement by Cody.
It would have been more than just verbiage.
Okay.
I would have had conflict. I would have had physicality that was going to be resolved in the main event. And I would have revisited that story at least once, if not twice, throughout the 2-hour window.
Mm-hmm.
Just talking about it on the front end of the show and establishing that something is going to happen isn't necessarily enough to sustain and increase a viewer's desire to see what's going to happen at the end. You can't just make the announcement and then hope people will show up at the end. You have to do something emotional. You have to do something that creates energy and interest. And what's that word? Anticipation. And sometimes just making an announcement, whether it's Christian Cage talking about what's going to happen tonight on Dynamite, or whether it's Cody Rhodes making a match, is not sufficient to really build anticipation for a main event. So I think, and again, I'll have to go back because I didn't sit down and make notes. I literally watched the show like everybody else did. But I think for both of NXT and AEW, I was a little, NXT in particular, I was a little disappointed in the Cody Rhodes segment. Cody does an amazing job. Cody Rhodes is in a class all of his own.
Totally.
And getting better by the minute.
I agree.
But it wasn't enough to really make me want to stick around for the main event. I mean, obviously I did for other reasons, but it was a 7 on what could have been a 10.
Yeah.
In terms of what that segment should have and would have been designed to do.
For me, it felt like it was a cameo for the sake of having a cameo. There was nothing wrong with it per se. It was
absolutely nothing wrong with it, but they left a lot on the table.
Yeah. And that was my biggest gripe with this NXT show, which again, I really did enjoy. I've kind of been on the NXT bandwagon the past month or so. I really have enjoyed the product, and I think they're doing an excellent job. I just felt like this episode took a little bit of a veer to hit those cameos rather than focusing on furthering stories that NXT typically does a pretty good job at. That was my biggest gripe with the show. But again, looking at these comparisons of the segment by segment breakdowns, I also want to say this about quarters, by the way, guys. Quarter hour breakdowns, those are averages of the quarter. That does not mean that they peaked with that number in that quarter, or they volleyed in that. It's this average of what happened in that 15-minute time period within the hour. So it doesn't read quite as simply as it looks like it does. But looking at these head-to-heads here, I find it fascinating that the shows aren't structured terribly differently. You see matches happening at the same time. You see a lot of promos happening at the same time with one another. I mean, is there a tried and true formula to how you go about stacking promos versus matches? That's me again, genuinely asking you that.
No, I mean, there's not a template. You know, every show's different. Every show has different action. Every show has different stars. Every show has different story. So it depends. I love this question or this comment from Darren Stanley, though. And 3 stories, A, B, and C. The A story has to pop each act. Eric is so very correct. One of the things that I did in TNA, which drove Vince Russo crazy, is pretty much in working with Viacom, Spike Television at the time, and the executives there, mandated that we create a show Bible once for every quarter. Every quarter had a show Bible that laid out what's going to be our A story, what's going to be our B story, what's going to be our C story. And then we went on to D and then subsequent miscellaneous stories underneath, which is your younger talent that you're trying to develop. One of the reasons for creating an A, B, C story is not only to kind of keep everybody's head in the game and realize who's most important in any particular quarter or going into a pay-per-view, whatever, but it's to dedicate the amount of television time. So if your A story is Jon Alba versus Eric Bischoff, and you've got 60 minutes for a television show, I want to make sure that I allocate a certain percentage, the largest percentage of my television program time to that story. Now, it doesn't mean it has to come in the way of a match necessarily, but whether it's vignettes, whether it's on-the-fly interviews, whether it's backstage interviews, whether it's an in-ring confrontation, whatever it is, that A story deserves and needs the largest percentage of television time in that format. Your B story gets the second most amount of time. Your C story gets the third most amount of time, and so forth. But if you don't look at your A story and commit to your A story, and then creatively, not just checking the box, dedicate compelling television time to help build that story. This is kind of going back to the opening segment and segment of the quarter hours that I was referring to. Neither show, in my opinion, did an adequate job, a great job. Maybe adequate is a good word. They did an adequate job, but not a great job of building anticipation to the main event. That's where they both left a little bit of meat. You know, NXT left a little bit of meat on the bone. AEW clearly left a lot more. And that's so nuanced, and it's different with every show. There is no one-size-fits-all template.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I felt watching the AEW show that there was quite a bit of effort made into building towards the main event. You had the Christian promo. The Christian promo doesn't just mention the Luchasaurus Adam Copeland match. It also mentions the match that is to follow it, which is Bryan Danielson versus Swerve, where the winner of that match is going to get a shot at Christian Cage. That becomes relevant to the storytelling of the Hangman Page, or of the Swerve versus Bryan Danielson match. We see Bryan Danielson get the win after Hangman Page becomes part of that. Then later in the night, where Edge picks up the win, furthering the conflict between Luchasaurus and Christian that is slowly building, Bryan Danielson comes out later to make the save, setting up their match that was established earlier in the show for next week.
Established. Not compelling, just check the box. There's no emotion in it. And I'm not doing a good job articulating this. The art in producing television isn't just getting it down on paper and checking the box. That's a fucking cake recipe. You're creating emotion and announcing a match, and the winner of this match gets this. Okay, you check the box. I've got my flour in, I've got my eggs in the bowl, but it's not compelling. You have to find a way, and this is where the creative comes into wrestling. Creative meaning you have to find a creative, unique, compelling way to get that information across. You can't just announce it. Announcing it doesn't create emotion. And that's the point I've been trying to make. Yes, you can announce, you can lay it all out on a format. You can, okay, this is great. We got an interview here. They've got an interview here. But if it's not compelling, if the audience doesn't care, it doesn't matter.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, you need that's any storytelling, right? You need some
Exactly.
compelling form of action in order to leverage that into the audience caring. It wasn't as simple as, oh, the winner of this match gets to face me. I mean, it was more than that. Christian Cage talked more about that, but you're not wrong. I don't disagree. Again, my role here on the show is to play devil's advocate a lot of time. To
No,
start
and I'm not
conversation.
arguing with you. I'm
Yeah,
arguing with the thought process
right.
because the your process is much like, people who are wrestling fans that have never produced a wrestling show. There's nothing wrong with that. Not every one of us that watch wrestling can have the advantage of having produced wrestling and having had a tremendous amount of success and a tremendous amount of failure and learning from all of the above. That's the process, right? That's where you learn, and that's where you begin to understand the nuances of putting together a wrestling show, which is far more complicated and difficult than a lot of people in the television industry even recognize
Sure.
until they do it or they're exposed to it. But
Derek from Ad Free Shows wants to know: is there anyone in the wrestling world that Eric would be making a call to if you were Tony Khan to come in and help structure the shows better? Or is there someone in AEW already?
I think Tony's beyond help. I don't think Tony Khan is the type of person that wants help. I think Tony Khan, more than anything else, wants to be Paul Heyman or wants to be Vince McMahon. It's a vanity project. He loves wrestling. Okay, I get it. He loves wrestling. He loves it. He loves it with every fiber of his being. Doesn't mean he's good at it. And unless Tony recognizes that he's not good at it, you could bring in anybody you wanted to, and it won't work because he won't listen, not to the extent that he needs to. I wouldn't wish that position on anybody that I know. Absolutely not. Until and unless Tony or an executive at Turner, because at some point, we're going to talk about this in just a few minutes, I think, or sometime during the show. But at some point, there's got to be a network executive that's in charge of oversees the AEW product. That's got to get on the ball, because some of this stuff, like I said, this is a weird storm. You've got Tony Khan, who knows nothing about producing television. I don't care how much of a wrestling fan he is. He doesn't know anything about producing television. And you've got a network now in Warner Discovery that doesn't know anything about the wrestling business. So you got a TV producer that doesn't know anything about television and a television network that doesn't know anything about wrestling. How do you think that's going to end up? Eventually, especially if Warner has a stake, a 30% stake, as you and I have both heard to be true. We don't know for a fact. There's no smoking gun, but I believe it. A lot of people do believe it, those who are a little closer to the epicenter of what's going on. And at some point, somebody's going to have to go, this is not such a great idea the way we're doing it. Let's take a look at it. But until that happens, or until Tony recognizes that he just sucks at this, there's not going to be any changes. And I certainly wouldn't recommend anybody to go work there.
So you're saying it's okay to ask for help?
It's better than okay. It's insane not to. For anybody, not just for Tony Khan. For anybody. You want to surround yourself with people who are smarter and better than you are. That's the art. That's the art of building a great business, is to surround yourself with people who, in some cases, have more talent than you do in the areas that you don't have enough talent, so that you can move forward in the positive direction. The art is in surrounding yourself with quality people, not necessarily trying to do it all yourself.
Well, I ask because if you need some help down there below the belt, Eric Bischoff, you know that our friends at
I'm going
Manscaped
Manscaped.
have got you covered. Because this episode of Strictly Business is brought to you by Manscaped, who has taken a step up from Balloween to bring your face the cleanest shave it's ever seen. So this season, no need to toil and trouble. Manscaped's all-new Handyman is the best way to get rid of that stubble, featuring a compact design and next-gen skin-safe technology. The Handyman was designed to give you that smooth finish without the mess of a traditional shave. Get the sweetest treat this Halloween by going to manscaped.com and use code WrestleBiz, that's WRESTLEBIZ, for 20% off, plus free shipping. It may be spooky season, Eric, but you don't want to scare people with a scraggly beard. Give them something to look at with Manscaped's Handyman. Are you tired of bad razor marking your necks, looking like a scary movie? Well, with the Handyman skin-safe technology to help reduce nicks and cuts, you can finally feel confident when going for that close shave. For wet or dry use, feel free to bring this anywhere and everywhere. The compact design and airplane friendliness makes this the perfect travel tool for any on-the-go activity, and being able to shave up to 3 days growth without the mess of a wet shave is priceless. Eric, we've talked ad nauseum about how great these products are for the lower portion of your body, but it is important to give yourself a little self-love there when you're trying to keep those beautiful, perfect dimples looking great, right?
Well, if you haven't noticed, I brought home a beard from the UK that I just haven't gotten around to shaving off yet. But I'm going to, and I actually got a new Manscaped product in the house. I can't remember which one it is.
You got the
I remember,
Handyman.
I
It
know
was
what
just
it
delivered
is.
to you.
It was delivered to me, and I opened it up last night, looked at it. I don't know what the product name is. I think it's, because I always get them mixed up. So when
I
you shave
believe you
your
got
beard,
the hand because I got the Handyman delivered to me, and it's awesome.
yeah, I haven't used it yet. It's still in the box. And I'm looking at this beard this morning when I was brushing my teeth, and I go, damn, Mrs. B's going to want that thing gone. So I'm going to give it a try here probably tonight or tomorrow morning. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Manscaped products are great.
Yeah,
Just freaking great.
they are. And, you know, now that I'm back in the TV realm, which, by the way, my association with you it's given me quite a few street cred points. So I appreciate the little rub that you've given me on that front. There's a lot of marks there in the production room at SNY, and they love themselves some Easy E. And now I can tell them that he's using Manscaped because I'm using Manscaped to look real good on TV once again. And we want to help you look good with our friends at Manscaped. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code WrestleBiz at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com, and use code WrestleBiz for a look as sweet as candy. Get yourself the Handyman from Manscaped. And we thank them for sponsoring Strictly Business. Okay. There was a pretty controversial segment on AEW Dynamite that had a lot of people talking, and it was a big part of the discourse over the course of the past 24 hours. MJF himself has chimed in on it on social media. I encourage you to go to his Twix page to check out what he had to say in long form. But for those who may have missed it, Juice Robinson, part of Bullet Club Gold, was cutting a promo on MJF, and he took out a roll of quarters. Now, if you're familiar with Juice Robinson, this is not unfamiliar. He uses a roll of quarters as a weapon with his hand.
And that's been happening for decades. Decades. One of my favorite matches involving Kurt Hennig and Nick Bockwinkel. So it's been going on since the beginning of wrestling time.
Yes. Now, with that said, you may recall MJF about a month and a half ago told a pretty sincere story in one of his promos about being heckled as a young Jewish boy and having quarters thrown at him. And it was a pretty compelling, heartfelt promo from him. And this roll of quarters that Juice Robinson said that he had in store for Max had his name on it. It had Friedman on it. And this comes, of course, just a few days after this tragic loss of life that we saw in Israel, and a pretty highly emotionally charged situation. I'm not Jewish. I don't feel I have any place to speak on how anyone should feel about this particular stuff, but I know it was something that you
I
had
don't
some
think one
thoughts
has
on.
to be Jewish to have an opinion, but go ahead.
No, I'm saying on how it should make you feel, not the events. I'm saying how this particular promo made someone feel. I don't feel I'm at place to speak about that, but do you have any thoughts on the presentation of this? What any of the fallout from this?
Yeah, I'm gonna a couple disclaimers here. Number one, I think very highly of MJF. I don't know him real well as a person, but the limited time that I've spent with him in person and the interactions that I continue to have with him, direct mail or text, I think very highly of him, MJF. I think the world of him as a talent. I don't know him well enough as a person, but I think the world of him as a talent. I think we're just seeing the surface or the tip of the iceberg of what MJF can be as a talent. I love watching him. I love listening to his promos. I love the fact that he embraces heat. There's so many things that I really, truly respect and admire about MJF as a professional. But MJF is young. MJF has never been in the television business. And while I understand, I read what MJF posted, and I encourage everybody to do so because it's his perspective. But there's judgment involved. And I think the judgment to showcase that angle while what is going on which is unprecedented. By the way, we've never seen in real time images. I'm not even going to mention them here. We all know what they are. This has never happened. And the judgment to use anti-Semitism as the premise for a story under these circumstances reflects a lack of judgment, both on MJF's part, more importantly, on Tony Khan's part. I cannot, it's part of the reason I'm half pissed off. You know, when I should be kind of celebrating in a way, not because NXT won and AEW lost. I really am not invested in that. I am invested in the business of the wrestling business. I feel like I have a perspective on it. And the perspective that I had, you know, manifesting to as closely as it did to my prediction, sure, that's fun. It feels good. But I'm genuinely disappointed and angry. And I think disappointed is a better word. I'm not angry. But the lack of judgment on Tony Khan's part, because he's the boss. It's his sandbox. It's his sand. It's his toys in the sandbox. And he's the head of creative, the president, the chairman of the board, whatever the fuck he is, to allow that while in real time images that are as barbaric as anything I could have ever imagined seeing on television, and then use that anti-Semitism as a premise for an angle. And look, MJF, I get it, man. And if you want to talk, I probably won't want to talk after listening to this, but it's just the judgment is wrong. I get the motivation. I understand. I think I understand. I can't possibly understand it because I didn't live through it. But I understand and can relate to the intent. But intentions aren't enough.
Mm-hmm.
Judgment has to factor in. And I'm shocked. And if there's a network executive at Warner Brothers Discovery, whose job it is to oversee AEW, who allowed that to happen, I'm out. I have no interest in the product. It's just, I don't get it. I really don't get it.
Yeah, reading Max's post, and again, I encourage everyone to go out and read it on their own jurisdiction. But it seems like, in his perspective, the story they're trying to tell is overcoming bullying, overcoming that stuff. But I do believe that the segment, regardless of what the intent was, kind of came off a little tone deaf, given the
A little tone deaf, John?
very, very tone deaf. Given
Tone deaf,
everything going on.
tone deaf is a nuance. There's nothing tone deaf about this. This was enough said.
Yeah.
People can make up their own minds. I'm not here
Yeah.
to preach, brother. I have my own
Right.
personal feelings, but
Yeah.
to me, as a television producer, as a television network,
Yeah.
beyond me.
Yeah. I was very surprised it made the air. I was very surprised that it made the air. And again, I can't sit here and tell anyone how they should or shouldn't feel about it, but it certainly was surprising.
And on a larger scale, and we've seen this before, right? Using your television, your wrestling platform as a platform to express your politics.
Social commentary. Mhm.
That's stupid.
Yeah.
This is a wrestling show. People
Yeah.
watch it to have fun. You're not going to change the world with your professional wrestling television show. It's let's get off it.
Yeah. But all things considered, Eric, the sad part about it was, for me, it took a lot away from what, generally speaking, was a very positive night for pro wrestling. A lot of people watched pro wrestling on a Tuesday night, and that's a good thing. In theory, that should be a good thing. Even if you look at the year-to-year comparison, the key demo was up more than 0.10. I saw the stat. I think it was more than 0.10. They did 0.44 combined last year on the same week, and they did 0.56 this year. So there's an improvement there. More people
What was
watch wrestling.
John? I don't mean to interrupt you, but what was the baseball game last night?
So last night there was a blowout game with the Astros. Then the Rangers and the Orioles was also a blowout game. So it was not competitive playoff baseball.
Okay, so neither
was-
game had much.
It was the start of the NHL season, which is why the preemption took place in the first place. Well, this whole week, I should say, is the preemption.
And that should not be a factor. NHL is not necessarily a hot television property, so I wouldn't imagine that's. I would assign a lot more of a competitive factor to the playoffs in Major League Baseball this time of year than I would to the openings of the NHL season.
Yeah. So that was what they went against. The playoff game, blowout. Both games were blowouts. So I'm curious to see what the numbers are on that. But yeah, I mean, still, all things considered, an enjoyable night of wrestling. Both shows were pretty damn good, in my opinion. I enjoyed both of them.
And like I said when we opened up the show, I don't want to end the show on a bad note, but I thought the lead up, the build up into it, the energy, it was just look. It was not Monday Night Wars. We're still talking about WWE's C show against AEW's A show. Even though the deck was stacked and all that, it was a Tuesday night. There's not a history between the two of competing head to head like that. But it was just a little sample, a little taste, a reminder of some of the fun that we used to have when it was WWE versus WCW. And that energy is what elevated the wrestling business. And I think that energy, to your point, elevated the demo.
Yeah.
I think if it was something that was consistent, and I'm not suggesting that AEW should do it because they are clearly unprepared and not capable. But if they were, to see that, even if it was just on Tuesday nights, would be just awesome because it does engage the fans. It gets people to argue back and forth and compare notes and debate, and it just raises the level of energy and awareness. And
we did have it. We had it on Wednesday nights. They were head to head for more than a year plus.
Yeah, but it wasn't the same. Just didn't feel the same. Maybe it was me. Maybe I wasn't engaged, so that's why I didn't feel the same. And primarily I wasn't engaged because it was their A roster versus a developmental roster. I'm sorry. You can't convince me that that's compelling or anything remotely close to a real war. It's more of a situation than it is a war. But this felt a little different, because WWE was stacking the deck, because AEW and little Tony Khan was running around calling people bald assholes and all that stuff. It just made it feel different to me, and it gave it more energy, which I kind of got a kick out of.
Did any of the tweets make you laugh?
Well, Tony Khan's made me laugh.
Okay.
I got a message for you. Bald asshole? Like, really?
Are you a Curb Your Enthusiasm fan or no?
No.
That came from Curb Your Enthusiasm. He took that GIF from it. That is an all-time great show. One you should go out of your way to watch for sure. I that did pop me. I'm not gonna lie, it did pop me.
Do we have some questions here we want to get to before we wrap up?
If any ad-free shows members have any additional questions that they would like to throw out there, I would love to see them. We got just some comments throughout the course.
We got a lot of comments here, but
he said, I agree with Eric. From my perspective, it was just Christian taking credit for the first 30 minutes without credits. It didn't really advance the show, talking about the opener there. Mike says, Eric is so smart when it comes to this. We need an AFS promotion and have Eric run it.
Not happening.
Who's the champion of the ad-free shows wrestling federation?
Well, we'll have to. He's got to be. I got to be careful what I say here. But Coach Rosie, man, he's got to be the baby face of all baby faces.
Oh yeah. Send a lot of love to Coach Rosie. He's a big time supporter of all the ad-free shows programs, and we appreciate him there. Here's one from Dylan. Just came in. What could pull the nose up on AEW? Get Tony away from booking? ?
Yeah, Tony should find a way to find satisfaction in being the guy that put it all together and oversees it in its growth, and hand off creative to somebody who knows what the fuck they're doing. When it comes to managing talent, certainly creating the show, producing television, because he clearly doesn't have it. And he's the mistakes that he's making, it reminds me of, one of the things that made me lose so much respect for Tony almost 2 years ago to the day. I should pull up the post, but essentially it said, if Ted Turner knew 1% about wrestling as I do, WCW would still be around. Well, let me tell you something, Tony Khan. If you knew 0.5% of what Ted Turner knows about producing television, you might not have got embarrassed the way you were embarrassed last night. Tony's so focused on being the next Paul Heyman or being the next Vince McMahon or Paul Levesque. That's what he's focused on. And he needs to focus on the product, his product, not the WWE product. He needs to focus on his own product, and he needs to find people who are more talented than he to take over creative. It's that simple. That would pull the nose up. He's got all the talent in the world. There's no problem with talent. He's so deep in talent, it's hard to remember who he's got on his roster sometimes. They're in a witness fucking protection program. And these are great talents. It's not a talent issue. It's a Tony Khan issue. Until that changes, nothing else will.
Brian wants to know, does the Twitter stuff from Tony hurt AEW and turn fans away, in Eric's opinion?
I think it damages the brand overall because it's childish. It's not really very entertaining. It's not smart. It's like his show, not compelling. It's embarrassing more than anything. It's embarrassing. And I think fans are beginning the goodwill. One of the things I talked about almost 2 years ago when I went on a rant, similar to the one I'm on today, was Tony came in, AEW showed up. There was so much goodwill. There were so many people, including me, while I was working for WWE. I was there. I watched their premiere episode from the WWE writers' room in Stamford, Connecticut. And I'm cheering them on because I knew, and I know, that competition like that can be really, really good if the competition is good. But there was so much goodwill. Wrestling fans all over the world really were hungry for that alternative. WWE was pretty stale at the time. It was growing. The financials were great. Stock was off the charts. Everything was great. But the product itself was flat and stale. And if you go back and listen to some of my criticisms before WWE hired me, during my tenure in WWE on the podcast, and subsequently, there was a sameness. I used to talk about this all the time. There's a sameness to the WWE product. There was a sameness to the product where it felt like you were putting all of this great talent and everything else and production and all that. You're putting it into this cookie dough machine and you were cranking out WWE cookies, and every one of them, while they were maybe a little different colored, they all tasted the same. They all felt the same. There was a sameness to every single thing that you saw, and it created an appetite in me for an alternative product, much like it did the wrestling audience. So there was so much goodwill that has been blown, frankly, by spending so much time, especially early on, taking shots at WWE when they weren't really competing. They weren't going head to head. But yet there was this constant, it went from Tony all the way down to some of the talent, some of whom are friends of mine and I have respect for, but they're all taking their shots at Vince McMahon and WWE and Triple H, blah, 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 blah. And now this, and if you're going to look, ironic coming from me, the guy that gave away their finishes, the guy that constantly called, shit stain Dave Meltzer came up with something, oh, you can't believe, Tony called out, WWE and Eric did that. And then the WCW fell off the charts after that. No, dipshit. I started calling out WWE. I hired Lex Luger out from underneath him and put him on my television. I was giving away their finishes. I was doing all kinds of in-your-face shit, but I was actually going head to head. Tony has been on the sidelines taking cheap shots, and the talent taking cheap shots without having the guts to really go head to head. And now that they finally have, kind of, sort of, they got spanked. That, and then you add the silly tweets that Tony Khan justified. This is awesome, chant. Who gives a fuck? That's not going to get your product over. And it makes you look small. So much of what we see from Tony Khan and hear from Tony Khan makes him look small. And that eventually chips away at the goodwill that you still have. And we're seeing it over the last 6 months or a year, largely because of the Punk disaster. It's once the audience starts losing their confidence in you, and trust me, I know what I'm talking about. It happened to me. I know from where I speak. Once you start losing them and you start doing things out of desperation, you're starting to look smaller and smaller and smaller every week. And that's what I see out of Tony's tweets and the silly shit that he does. Somebody should take his phone away from him, keep him away from a camera, for God's sake. Somebody's got to love that man enough to tell him that he should not be in front of a camera, because it doesn't do his brand any good. It's not a criticism of him. Yes, I know he's a wonderful human being. He's a nice guy. I believe that. I'm not just saying that as a smart ass. I believe he's a good human being, and I believe he's a nice guy. Doesn't make him qualified to be in front of a camera. But it's his sandbox.
Get this one from Michael here. What percentage of the AEW audience do you think is just people watching because it isn't WWE? And I mean, I'll say this real quick before you answer, Eric. I mean, that was, as Eric just alluded to, that was the point of AEW's launch, was to provide an alternative, provide something that isn't WWE. So I don't think there's a negativity that comes with that connotation per se, but I am curious what your thought. What percentage of the audience do you think is people who don't watch WWE?
Probably 25%. No more.
Yeah.
Well, look, we've seen it. I mean, it's not just my opinion because I just have a gut feeling. I think it's maybe 25, maybe a little more. But look what happens to Collision when they're up against a PLE. Fucking trounced. Look what happened last night. I mean, look, I think last night, I think AEW did better than I thought they would.
Mm-hmm.
I told someone that I'm very close to that I thought they would come in, that I thought they'd come in around 425. I didn't tell them I thought they would. I told them I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
But I think the energy that was created during the day, it's kind of like there's going to be a car wreck down on the corner of 1st and 3rd. If you show up at 5 o'clock, you can see it. I think there was a car wreck kind of curiosity for both shows, not just for AEW. But I think that elevated the audience quite a bit.
Yeah.
I don't think we'd sustain these kind of numbers over an extended period of time if the schedule were such that AEW was going against NXT every Tuesday night. I don't see it. You wouldn't have the kind of excitement or interest that we had last night.
Yeah.
But I'd say 25, maybe 30%.
I also think it was a perfect storm too, in terms of shifting momentum, because AEW had a lot of momentum end of 2021 or so. I think the whole creative change really whipped a lot of enthusiasm up for the WWE product, plus Cody coming in super hot how he did. And it was this perfect storm of one ship having all these things go right and the other things started to come down a bit, come down to earth. And we are back at that disparity now as a result of that. Because, I mean, I think AEW really was making a lot of strides for a period of time. Just it was not able to sustain it, not strictly because of WWE. There were a lot of AEW's own misdoings that led to that, as we've documented here on this podcast. I still think both programs are great. I think the beauty of wrestling, Eric, is that you can watch whatever you want to watch and enjoy whatever the hell you want to enjoy. I think that is one of the coolest things about having all these options. There are people out there who hate WWE, who hate AEW, and NWA's their show they watch, or Impact's their show they watch, or MLW's their show they watch. I think the ability to have all that choice is awesome. So, I know we cover the business of the business here on this podcast, but man, the more options and the fact that there is so many quality television programs out there to enjoy wrestling, as far as I see it, that's a good thing for everyone. That's just my perception.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that position.
Yeah.
And again, I know the show's, and it's coming off way more negative than I wanted to. And a lot of it has to do with some of the other subject material we've covered here, but I think I was excited yesterday. I had fun yesterday. I had fun watching both shows. I love the idea of it. I love the energy of it. I love the back and forth, whether I agree with something you say or somebody on Twitter says, or I don't agree with it. Doesn't fucking matter, man. It's energy. I love the energy. Right. So whatever you feel strongly about, have at it.
Yeah.
This show is about the business of the wrestling business and my perspective based on my 30 years in it and my success and my failure and everything in between. And sometimes I know I come off harder and angrier than I should, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that I am passionate about the business.
You care.
I want
Absolutely.
to be successful.
You care.
Otherwise,
I know you do.
Otherwise, I'd be sitting here laughing about it.
Yeah, no, I know you care, man. I absolutely know you care. We don't got to take a deep dive on it, but I'll just ask you 2 quick news items, then we'll wrap. We heard from multiple outlets. Seems like CM Punk to WWE is not happening anytime soon. Any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, not surprised, but also wouldn't be surprised if that situation changes down the road. We talked about it here. I still believe, look, is there equity? Is there value in Phil Brooks as the character CM Punk? Yes, I do. Does WWE need him? Absolutely, they don't. But it's not binary. I mean, do they need him? No, but could he be an asset? Yes, but I think the only way that could happen is if there was a significant meeting of the minds and convincing that the baggage that has come in the past with Phil Brooks is going to be left somewhere else and not brought into WWE. If Phil Brooks, the person, I'm not calling him Phil Brooks out of disrespect, but if the person can convince the other person in WWE that's making that decision that the character of CM Punk could show up at the doorstep without all the baggage that comes with him, I think there's business to be had.
And the other thing was, we heard from your friend Mike Johnson at PW Insider this week that Vince is essentially out of creative in WWE, and that Endeavor has tapped Paul Levesque as the guy who's, I believe the terminology was 99.9% in charge here. Any comments you'd like to add on that?
Look, I respect the hell out of Vince McMahon professionally. I don't think anybody can look at his history and what Vince McMahon has built over the decades. Tony Khan wouldn't be doing what Tony Khan is doing. You and I wouldn't be here talking about what happened last night if it weren't for the vision, the work, everything that went into the risks, everything that went into making WWE what WWE is. The WCW wouldn't have been around if it had not been for Vince McMahon and WWE. That's a fact. That being said, I spent a cup of coffee there back in 2019. And I think that the decision that's been made, if it's true, I believe that it probably is a great decision, not because I don't think Vince McMahon is capable or is valuable in creative, but you can't have two generals fighting at the same war. You've got to have a leader. Yeah. You've got to have the buck stop with someone. Yeah. And having someone, especially someone like Vince McMahon, who is the 1,600-pound gorilla. Fuck that 800-pound gorilla. They're easy to deal with. You got a 1,600-pound gorilla who's looking over your shoulder, tweaking and questioning, and in some cases, completely destroying things that you're wanting to do. You can't function that way. It's just not sustainable. And I think if that decision has been made, and if it's true, out of no disrespect to Vince, I think it was a great decision because it will allow Paul Levesque and his team. It's not just Paul Levesque. It's Paul Levesque. It's Bruce Pritchard, and it's Ed Koskey. It's an amazing group of extraordinarily talented people who now are going to have the freedom and the confidence to move in a direction without knowing that the rug's going to get pulled out from underneath them at the last minute. Yeah. It's not great. That's not a great creative environment. The best ideas are not going to be born in that environment. Trust me, I can tell you from firsthand experience. It's extraordinarily frustrating and demoralizing. And I think what we'll see going forward, if indeed it's true, is a very energized creative process. I think we've gotten a glimpse at it over the last 6 months.
I mean, well, you see, the last 6 months, I don't know, because they clearly were going back to a lot of Vince-isms. And by that, I mean, things were changing up until the last second. People who were being promoted.
Not as much, though. Not as it was happening, but not as frequently.
Well,
when I was there, you could count on it happening every Monday.
Of course. But what I was going to say is, I noticed in the last month, things were changing just based on who was on TV. And I wasn't surprised to hear that this was a change that was made. And it's good. There's a lot of great talent out there. Bronson Reed is a badass. I love seeing him out there. Love seeing Johnny Gargano back on TV, Tegan Knox. I mean, it's exciting. So
I can't wait to see Braun Breaker.
I think there are two people that are going to just be the franchises for WWE. It's going to be Braun Breaker and it's going to be Carmelo Hayes. And I think the two of them will probably be up.
Carmelo got to be in the ring with The Undertaker last night. How cool is that?
Oh, my God. I mean, both of them. I mean, The Undertaker does the arm raise with Carmelo Hayes. He choke slams Braun Breaker.
I mean, come on. Can you just imagine how Carmelo felt?
Yeah.
Can you imagine that? I can.
He's a spectacular talent, Carmelo Hayes. He is just going to be such a big star for them. I have no doubt. And Braun Breaker, he found his own as a heel, Eric. I really like him as a heel. I think the babyface stuff was fun where he was kind of wrecking people, but now, I mean, he's got an attitude and he's an ass.
He's going to, it's so funny. I was watching with Lori last night. And there's just enough of Rick Steiner.
Yeah.
And you can hear it in his voice. I mean, there's speech pattern. It was so cool. I was excited.
He got up for that choke slam too. I'll tell you that. He got some
He's a big
air.
dude. He's a big dude.
He got some air. Did you see the Iron Claw trailer? The movie about
I did
Von
not.
Erichs?
I did not.
Yeah, go check that out. It looks fantastic.
I saw a lot of chatter about it today
yeah.
on social, so I'll definitely check it out.
Definitely go check that out. We want you to check out advertisewitheric.com, my friends, because that's how you're going to get on board with Eric and I. Get your business out in front of thousands and thousands of listeners every single week here on 83weeks.com, adfreeshows.com, the 83 Weeks YouTube. This is your place to be. Eric and I are rocking and rolling with Strictly Business every single week here. I believe this is genuinely one of the most informative and unique pro wrestling podcasts in a space that's very hard to be unique in. I believe Strictly Business is one of the most unique podcasts out there. Anything else you want to throw out there, my friend?
No, brother, I'm feeling like it's time for a nice big salad and
okay.
A bit of getting caught up in the news, unfortunately, and I think I'm gonna chill and relax after this.
I'm gonna give you a quick out here, okay? And I'm gonna see if you're up to the challenge. I will drop this wager. I will drop you having to buy me dinner if you sing happy birthday to Tony Khan here as we end the show. Would you be willing to do that?
Fuck no.
This has been Strictly Business. We will see you next time.